Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating source text that completely reimagines the timeline of world religions. We're looking at a very specific, unified perspective on how ancient traditions actually connect to one another. It definitely challenges the usual boundaries we tend to put around different faiths, you know? We're going to trace a single, unbroken thread starting straight from the dawn of humanity.
So let me ask you this. When did Islam actually begin? If you grab a standard history textbook, it's almost always going to point you somewhere around the 7th century in the Arabian Peninsula. But the source material we're analyzing today, it throws that conventional timeline right out the window. It totally disrupts how we normally categorize religious history.
The text gives a super direct, honestly pretty surprising answer, with the first man, Adam. The source explicitly claims that the religion didn't just pop up millennia after humanity started, but right at the starting line. According to this text, the religion began the precise moment Adam submitted himself to God. This completely shifts the framing. It moves us from viewing religion as some historical institution founded on a specific date to a spiritual continuum that has existed exactly as long as human beings have. Okay, let's dive into this by starting with a core definition. Section 1, the meaning of Islam.
To really get why this text places the origin all the way back with Adam, we've got to look at how the source defines the word itself. It isn't treating it like just a proper noun or some modern historical label. The text defines Islam primarily as a literal action, submission to God. Plus, it states the word also means peace, specifically the peace a person attains by engaging in that act of submitting to God. By defining the religion as an action verb, rather than just a societal noun, the text establishes its core argument. When it says Islam began with Adam, it literally means Adam performed this physical and spiritual action of submitting himself to God. In this framework, he was practicing this religion from day one simply by that act of submission. So who carried this message forward after Adam? That brings us to Section 2, Timeline of the Prophets. And this brilliantly illustrates the chronological line of messengers spanning human history. It kicks off with Adam as the first prophet and then moves through these major, universally recognized figures, Abraham, Moses, David, and Jesus, eventually wrapping up with Muhammad, who the text identifies as the last prophet. What the source is doing here is presenting a profound theological argument. In this framework, Abraham, Moses, David, and Jesus aren't founders of totally new, distinct religions. It's more like they're relay runners passing the exact same baton. They're all participating in a single, continuous project, each preaching the exact same underlying religion of submission to God. But get this, the text doesn't limit this message to just these 6 major figures, or even to a specific region like the Middle East. The source notes that there were hundreds of other prophets of God dispersed throughout time whose names we don't even know. Yet, according to the text, every single one of them preached this identical, continuous message. The overarching claim here is one of massive scale, that Islam, this continuous practice of submission and the resulting peace, was not a localized phenomenon, but the single universal religion Allah destined for all of mankind, throughout all of history. Which naturally leads us to Section 3, Origins of Other Names. Because, logically, you might be wondering, if all of these prophets were preaching the exact same religion of submission, why do we have so many different names for world religions today? Where do the divisions come from? Well, the source explains this by looking at the sociological choices made by later communities. Over time, the followers of earlier prophets started using new names for their respective religions. The text points out that the religion of Moses became known as Judaism, deriving its name from the tribe of Judah. Similarly, the religion of Jesus became known as Christianity, named directly after Jesus Christ. The text posits that these new names were adopted based on specific tribes or central figures. The communities basically shifted away from a theological definition, the act of submission itself, and moved to a sociological one, categorized by group affiliation or personal reverence. The text sets up a very distinct contrast here. On one side, you have the followers of the earlier prophets who adopted these new distinct names like Judaism and Christianity, anchoring their religious identity to people and tribes. On the other side, the text points out that the followers of Muhammad maintained the original name, Islam. By keeping this specific name, the source implies they actively retained the original descriptive title. They didn't name the faith after their prophet or after a specific Arabian tribe. Instead, according to the source, they held onto a name based purely on the universal, literal act of submission to God, practicing it and naming it exactly as the text claims Adam originally did. Which leaves us with something pretty profound to consider. How does viewing these historical figures as part of one continuous message change the way we look at world religions today? By analyzing this text, we uncover a fascinating lens of interconnectedness. It totally challenges the conventional idea of separate, competing historical origins, and instead presents a single, unified thread of submission and peace running from the very first man through to the present day. It's a real paradigm shift that reframes our entire understanding of religious history. Definitely something to think about. Until next time, keep questioning the narrative.